Well, thank you guys for that great intro, and it's great to be here in Riga with all of you. And I'm super happy to be here on stage with Julian. Julian, we've known each other for almost 6 years now, but I think for many people in the audience, it might be the first time that they're meeting you and hearing about Bliq. So maybe we can start by share a bit about your background and what does Bliq do, and maybe give everybody a quick intro on the journey of the company as well too has been a journey. So maybe share some of those points too for everybody, just to get everyone up to speed.
Yeah. So just for context, Luke is an investor into our company since that time. So thanks for the intro. Also, thanks for having me. Really cool. My background is I'm an engineer. I did my first master's degree in industrial engineering, worked in the German automotive industry, and then the second master's degree computer science, and then started this company with a former co-founder, with a former colleague of mine, Torgen, who's now my CTO. And initially, we wanted to build software for like ride-hailing drivers, like your Uber, Bolt driver, to make their job easier by like basically just aggregating all the different orders that come from all of these different platforms. And then we built like a massive driver network. And then we thought about, okay, how can we now monetize this in a better way? And then we said, okay, if you have the drivers already, which are historically very expensive to acquire and retain, then we could just basically build like a ride-hailing service on top of that and launch a consumer product, which we did. And this has also been growing quite nicely, and we even grew it all the way to almost 20 million in annual gross bookings in Poland and in Germany, and we have big plans. But then last year came like sort of like a cessation point where I realized, okay, we suddenly have companies like WeRide and Waymo getting out of like lab mode suddenly into like doing, I think there was this news that Waymo suddenly did 1 out of 3 rides in San Francisco. And then it occurred to me, okay, well, I'm a pretty little guy in this space. I mean, like we have big partners, but like small budget compared to like these like massive companies that have like infinite amount of money from Google. And then I said, okay, in Europe, because our legal system here is a little bit different, things tend to take a little bit longer, but I give it 3 to 5 years, and then we're going to have these cars on our European roads. And if you've ever sat in an autonomous car, the experience is super clean. So you don't really want to go back to having like the normal ride-hailing experience. And so I said, I think we're not going to have a business anymore if we do not act decisively. And then we had a budget of, I think, give or take 10 million at the time. And then I had a board meeting, and I think I scared people a little bit because I said, hey, like, if you really believe that's the future, and the future revenue is going to worth essentially zero in that future, then we have to put our money where our conviction is and stop the existing business and focus all our efforts, all the time, the money, the resources we have into making a company driverless. Essentially selling the same thing, which is transportation, but producing it in a different way. And that's what we did last year in, I think, August. And now we just got the certification to drive on public roads in the first European country, which is just up north. It's Estonia. And we have a couple of cars here as well. So that's the backstory.
I mean, I remember this board meeting, and it's never comfortable when the CEO comes to you and says, we made all this progress, but we actually think that we need to pivot the company into this new strategy. But this is also why we love working with founders like Julian, because you have to see around corners as an entrepreneur and see markets develop before they actually materialize and start building for those markets ahead of time. And I think autonomy is one of those markets. You look to the U.S. market. San Francisco has had Waymos on the streets for almost a year. Tesla has their robo-taxis that they have been talking about. But for the European market, it still feels like it's nascent. And we'll get into some of those questions in a little while. But Julian, I would love for you, on the topic of pivots, I think for all the founders that are in the audience, it takes a lot of courage and conviction to go through something like that. As you reflect back on the last maybe 5.5 years that we've known each other and how the company has gone through multiple iterations, maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice for founders just on this topic of how to think about building a company, having a North Star, but also being able to adapt as you go on that journey.
Yeah, very good one. So my very first business angel that I ever signed, he invested 50K into the company, like very early on. And when he called me to tell me that he's going to invest, and I was obviously super excited. He told me, like, I don't care what you're going to do. Chances are it's going to be very different from what you pitched me, and do not feel like you have to deliver on on the things that you told me. I only care about that you make me money in the end of the day. And I think that's what you should keep in mind. So I think self-reflection in that, I mean, self-reflection is an important skill, but like in that sense, do not hold yourself accountable for something that you have told someone a year ago that chances are they likely don't remember the details about this anyways. So if you have, and also like you constantly learn more. I mean, startup is about learning, right? So you have so much more information than you had, I don't know, 3 months ago, a year ago. So if you can explain your rationale, just execute it. I mean, people might not like that, and then it's your point to prove them wrong. And I think that's also what we did, because I had a ride-hailing company, and now I'm building an autonomy company, and I had to show people that I'm capable of doing that with my team. And but I think this just like gives you extra spirit. So like I think pivoting is much more. It's always better than like trying to make something work. Like if you know deep inside, it's not going to be the real thing.
Yeah, I think trusting your convictions, and you're a great example of that. You know, let's move to the topic of physical AI. Yeah. The previous panel, I think, took them 30 minutes to get to the topic of AI. We're going to jump right into question number 2. Yeah. And I'm sure many more panelists throughout the rest of the day will be similar. You know, I think many of us have in our phones, on our desktops, we use ChatGPT, we use Gemini, Claude with Anthropic. But you're building AI for the physical world. And so maybe help set the stage. I don't think many of us have as much familiarity yet with the idea of physical AI. Yeah. So what does physical AI mean to you, and how should we be thinking about it in our modern world?
I'm giving an example. So in my first job, I was working at an automotive manufacturing company, and I was like programming these robot arms that you may have seen like from the images that would basically just like do one thing, like like pick a piece up and then put it like somewhere else. And I was like writing the code for that. And this is like what traditional robotics or like physical like hardware is, right? And now what you have with physical AI, you can think about it like an LLM, large language model, but that can like move things in the real world, like and that does in a very intelligent way. So like to go back to my example, if I would have to do my job that I did 10 years ago now again, I would basically just write a prompt and say, hey, pick this thing here up and like move it over there. And then it wouldn't be like, for me, like, I don't know, 2 days of work. It would just be like a prompt and then it's done. I think this is in essence what physical AI really means.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting. The conventional wisdom says that to build to levels of autonomy that I think we're getting to today, it would require decades of data collection, billions of compute, cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But if you think about the journey for Bliq, and you go back to August, right, like last year when we decided to make this pivot, and now you have, many of you should try and book a demo ride there's 2 cars here actually outside, which we'll say more about in a bit. But you have cars on the road that are operating. How is it possible for a company to be so quick to market? And what enables that? What's changed? And is this a step change moment, or is it incremental progress? Basically, like every day, every month, it's been little things leading up to the last 10 years, or is it truly a step function change?
Yeah, it's clearly a step function change, because it's actually like it's one of the hardest things for me to answer, because people always say like, how can you have driverless cars in 8 months? Like it takes 1 billion in 10 years to do that, and I always answer that like it used to be like that, and people don't realize what's possible today. Because like if you were to like build a driverless car like even like 3 years ago, you would basically like program it in a so-called rule-based way. So we teach it, okay, this is a roundabout, and here's the program that we have to play like in a roundabout, right? And then you teach next how to do a left turn. And today we have something which is called a vision language action model. It's literally brand new technology, just like popularized really last year in like last quarter. And the idea of a VLA is that you give it an input, vision, for example, but it can also be like any other sensor, LiDAR, radar, ultrasonic, whatever comes to mind. And then you give it an action, like a prompt, like say, for example, like move this thing from here to there, or in a context of a car, change the lane to the left one, or like take the next turn right. And then you get an action, which is in our case, for example, a trajectory. And then we're going to translate this trajectory into actual steering motions with like the steering wheel, gas, and the brake pedal.
And if you were like, let's say, the founders in the audience that are thinking about building for the physical AI world, you mentioned the topic of visual language action models. For somebody who is a novice in that category, doesn't have a lot of context, maybe give us a minute or two primer on, what would be your advice for somebody to get up to speed in this category? And if they wanted to build, how quickly could you get something to market? You mentioned 8 months, from the pivot that we had. Is that curve coming down? And what are the steps somebody should go through if they're planning to build for the physical world with autonomy?
So first of all, I would say open source is great, as always. There is amazing stuff on GitHub that you can just check out. The other day I saw a demo on YouTube where someone had like 2 little robot arms on their desks, cost maybe 300 euros. And then he was showing it, I think it was 30 minutes of training data. And then these arms could fold laundry. It looked pretty bad. My wife wouldn't be happy, but it worked after just 30 minutes of training data. And this was something that someone like open sourced on GitHub. So I think that's a great starting point. And then if you invest your time and your energy into that, you can make it great. So I think that's what I would do first. And then after that, I think it really becomes about like different, I think timing really depends on other things nowadays. It's no longer like, I don't know, development time. It's more than about supply chain, hardware development. How do you make a product really cool, and how do you get this manufactured and certified? I think this is another things. But the actual code generation part, I think that has come down massively.
Yeah, and you mentioned the use case of folding laundry. Let's go back to the the use case you're building for at Bliq, and maybe give everyone in the audience 2 or 3 examples of how those VLAs, those visual action language models, how they actually are impacting the product that you're building. And walk through some of those use cases.
Okay, so it's basically like in traditional autonomy, which is a funny thing to say because actually it feels very new, but it's actually been 15 years of development already. And there is different parts of this stack. So there is, for example, the perception stack, which is there's a sensor stack, which is all the LiDAR, the cameras, and all of this stuff. And then they're all combined as a perception stack, which is a fused environmental picture of what's going on around the car. And then you have a trajectory and path planning, and then path execution verification, and then you have the actual driving the car, the actuation part. And now you had to in the past you had to write code for all of these different levels, which was and then for all different scenarios that the car can encounter, which can the crazy stuff happens on real roads. And there's also different rules of the road. And now all of these different areas are basically compressed into one, which is this VLA. Also this morning I learned that I think in the past it took about 40 to 45 different neural networks to run all the different functions and things that the car has to do. And they're now basically compressed into one, which is image in, action out.
It's insane. I mean, I think it's incredibly inspiring, but at the same time, it makes me a little bit nervous as a consumer. Think about getting in a car. I trust Julian, I trust his team. They're amazingly technically smart, all these things that you would want in a founding team. But 8 months to then get behind in a vehicle that's going to be operating on the roads. How do you think about safety? These, you mentioned the stack compressing down the road, a bunch of different layers of the stack, and now it's kind of one thing. Should that make us more nervous, more excited, more comfortable? Help us walk through this as consumers, right? Everyone in this audience can be a consumer of Bliq's technology. How should we think about the safety piece?
Yeah, I think this is really where normal AI and physical AI diverges, because this is where regulation comes in. And so what we do, and also what most of the other players in this space do, is we basically have the AI model, the VLA, is sort of the brain. And then you have a neural system that will then operate the car, and in between there is an interface, so to say, that translates what the model wants to do in something that the car is actually doing. And so we say we actually want to be very flexible what kind of models we use in our cars. Maybe I think the speed is crazy. Maybe in 6 months there's something that's way better than what we currently use, and we want to be able to use that. But we have to decouple the safety layer from that. So what we did is we actually developed our own system on chip, which looks like so. We made it gold on the outside, so it's shiny. It's not as big as the Jensen One things, but basically what this does is it's certified, it's automotive grade, it's certified by TÜV Nord in Germany, and what this does, it takes the input of the VLA, what the VLA wants to do, and then it translates it into signals for the car. But if there is any malfunction in the car, I don't know, something breaks down, a wire comes loose, or I don't know, then this will basically take over and bring the car to safe stop. And the cool thing is, this is not like specific to a specific car model. This can actually like work with any modern software-defined vehicle. Software-defined meaning that there is wires to the steering wheel, to the gate, to the brake and gas pedal, so you can like turn it on and off or like move it with code. And this is like the way how we solve it, and I think it's pretty cool.
I love when people bring like real products on stage. So I didn't know you were going to do that, but that was a nice little surprise. I want to shift gears to the topic of the European opportunity. Yeah. So we mentioned, I think people think about the autonomous car space as a U.S.-China race. Yeah. You've got Waymo in the U.S. We talked about San Francisco. You have Tesla, rolling out the robotaxi. Baidu in China and others. But you're building in Berlin. You mentioned Estonia. We're here in Riga. How should Europe be positioning itself for this opportunity, and why is this a good market to roll your technology out?
Yeah. So first of all, for me, it's like totally fine that they don't care about Europe, because this just means I can build here in quietly, and that there is not too much noise in the competition, right? So I think the strong parts of Europe are, first of all, it's got a great consumer and business market. Like, so we're not like building robotaxis, we're building for basically what comes beyond, and we're going to talk about that, I think. So you have a lot of consumers with like real car ownership. We have a lot of like government programs around commercial car use. So this is like great budgets to tap into when we think about it from a commercialization like side. And then from a legal standpoint, I think like someone in the earlier talk mentioned that like having small countries is a strong argument, which is very true. So I can give you a first-hand account of like what it's like getting certification for something totally new in a country like Estonia. So I think we called the transport authority there in November. And then now they told us what kind of paperwork they need. We sent them that in January. We did the testing in February, and now we have like on the day of like testing, we got the permission. And you know what this cost us? Like nothing. We got like 4 government officials working with us, like very competent people, and this is only possible in a small country like Estonia or like Latvia. And I think this is one of the great, amazing things of what we can do here in Europe. It also has downsides, because it's like approved in Estonia doesn't necessarily mean it also can be approved in like all of the other 27 member states, 26 member states. But it makes it easier. So now we have paperwork, like a certificate. We can now bring this to the Germans, to the Latvians maybe, and say, hey, like they looked at it, they found it safe. What do we have to do in order to also like prove to you that this is safe for operation in your country?
I love when the founder tells you that the cost is 0, because that means your runway is longer.
Yeah, I also love that.
Look, I mean, one of the things that I think, all just physically too, European cities, they're very dense, fragmented. There's a lot of older infrastructure. Just driving on the roads here in Riga, the beautiful like city, but it's an old city, so the infrastructure is in some ways a bit more challenging. Yeah. Is that a harder technical problem than if you were building for, let's say, roads in China or in the US? And does that help you develop better technology in order to have a solution that's going to work here in European cities? And is that a moat in some way?
Yeah, it definitely helps building, because like the bar is higher. And I give you like a slightly different example. So for example, like our technology requires like connectivity, because the rides are basically supervised by someone who's like making sure that everything goes okay from like a remote part. So we require very good mobile connection, which is something that like where we develop in Germany is like super bad. And then when we brought the cars to Estonia, which has amazing connectivity, like also like Latvia, and then everything just like worked so well, and we were blown away how well it works. And it was just because we developed this on this shitty connection that we had in Germany, in Berlin. And I think this also applies to many of like the problems that you mentioned about like different difficult like road situations in like narrow streets and so on. Yeah.
What is the hardest, like if you think about a Bliq car navigate? I did a ride with Julian before, and there was a larger delivery truck or something on a narrow road, and it was kind of cool to see how the software handles that situation, and make sure it's safe and proceeds without hitting anything. What is if you think about the most challenging scenario for a Bliq car to be in on a European street, what would you say that would look like?
Oof. So I think what's really hard is like, if you're like on a cross section, and like in Germany we have this that there is like on rural streets you can like go with 100, and then like there is no speed limit on a crossing, And so if you think about like the speed at which, like, I don't know, a motorcycle or something is approaching, to like see this and then compute or react to that, that's very challenging, because like its oncoming is very small, so you have to sense it, and then you have to make a very fast decision because it's approaching so fast, and then you have to like turn this into actions, right? So I think this is about the most challenging thing I could think of.
I also want to make sure we talk about the political dimension in Europe. You mentioned a few things about your experience with the regulators in Estonia, but I think there's also a narrative, in the media, amongst the tech community, and more broadly across, the broader European community, about the role of regulation. Does that help speed up? Does it help? Is it a hindrance in some way? These are important things to have, but at the same time, you have other countries, China, in some parts of the US, where people are moving very quickly, bringing technology to market. That's a bit of a risk. It makes me nervous. But at the same time, if you're a company, it might be easier to move faster. So how do you think about the role of regulation as it relates to a very heavily regulated category, which is driving on streets and transportation? How does that all fit into the company that you're building and your roadmap?
Good question. So first of all, like, if you're just starting out, if you're like very early stage and you're building in AI, honestly, I would just not care at all about regulation. I'm like, maybe a bit edgy to say this now after the previous person, but like, quite frankly, that's what your competition is doing. And so as long as you're not having like physical impact, like in a hardware startup, for example, that's just what I would do. And quite frankly, that's also what we did when we started out. We didn't go on public roads with our cars, but we just basically rented like some empty space. We just did stuff. And then I think secondly, you have to be smart about like where you go. So we thought very hard about if you want to go to the US with this or not. We actually had also like analysis done in like what states are like from a regulatory standpoint, regulation standpoint, like most friendly in the states. By the way, also like in the United States, also like every single state and every single city has also different rule set. So it's also like a false assumption to say that it's just like Europe is bad because it's like 27 states. America is 50. Yeah, so. So that's what we did. We said, okay, we're not going to go to the US because of logistics and also because of the political climate, and also, quite frankly, we don't want to be another Waymo. We want to be something that's new, that's novel, that's unique, and we have the chance to be that here. And so that's why we decided to be here. And then it was just about, okay, in which country can we go? Like where is basically like the path of least resistance? And then I wrote emails to every single transportation department in every single European country. And I got answers, and then I just basically like flipped through it and said, okay, this is too hard for me. I do not want to do this. And then like basically we end up with a short list, and then our decision to go to Estonia from Germany was a very deliberate one, because we found that they had like the most open approach to this. And I think that's what you have to do if you want to build in the space around regulation. Yeah? So I'm not saying embrace it, like, I'm just trying to like sneak around it where possible and make your life as easy as possible, and then use it as leverage to go to the people who regulate you in a more strict way and say, hey, it works here. See, now how can we get a shortcut from you as well?
I think there's a natural push and pull when it comes to these topics, about those who are putting policies in place and those who are building with those policies as a requirement. If you were speaking, to policymakers, what are one or two pieces of advice or feedback or things they should be considering that maybe as an operator they don't you see on a daily basis, but as a regulator they don't have the same sensitivity for?
Yeah. So I think what we need is also like a more harmonized way how we handle this kind of innovation in Europe. In like general automotive like law, that's already the case. There is like a European like standard for like how to type approve cars. The problem is with like the innovative stuff that's handled on national level. So I think what would really help is, and that's what I tell regulators all the time, to also have a European standard that is more like easily recognized, because then we could like transfer what we have in Estonia much easier to other countries. And now we basically have to go into like those bilateral conversations with every government individually, which is just like a waste of time. So that's what I would say would be most effective.
I want to make sure we talk about the kind of go-to-market model too, because you mentioned Waymo. Waymo is, and you were building in this world of sort of rideshare apps, right?
Yeah.
Having an app requesting a car, it could be any car that you get. It's different. Then you have the Tesla model of people owning their cars. Those cars have autonomous functionality in them. Maybe they have this robo-taxi fleet. Your model is a little bit different. So maybe explain to folks what you're going to bring to the market and how that fits into the overall vision.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to offer driverless cars on subscription, so that if you feel like your time is better spent working or relaxing instead of like being, so basically you can sit in the passenger seat on the right back instead of like in the front left. That's what we're selling. We're selling this as a subscription or like as a leasing model to private individuals, to businesses, for their executives, for example, so they can get from A to B more efficiently. And we believe that private car ownership has a very important role still. So I looked up the numbers, and so taxi and ride-hailing combined as a market share of like all the trips people do. If you think about like every time you go somewhere from like A to B, then in this, if you think about this like global transportation market, taxi and ride-hailing has a market share of about 1.5%. It's pretty tiny. Most of the trips are done like 20-30% by walking. And the majority share, 40-50% globally, is done by individual cars. And I think this is where a huge opportunity lies. Now, there's people making the argument that, but private car ownership is going to be eaten away by the autonomous cars. I don't really buy into that, because it's also what we heard 15 years ago when Uber launched. And so it hasn't really happened yet. And maybe it's going to like grow a little bit, the robotaxi category, but it's not going to be anywhere near this massive segment, and that's what we are aiming for.
It's interesting. My brother has been working in the car industry for 10 years, and I was talking to him. He loves his car, and I think people we have an attachment to our vehicles in a way, because it is a sense of freedom and a sense of like you can go anywhere, and having that kind of reliability and that peace of mind is a really interesting thing, I think, psychologically, is for us as humans. But maybe give everyone, if someone in the audience wanted to be a consumer and a user of Bliq going forward, what would that look like in their daily lives? Are they owning their car? Are you putting something on top of it, then retrofitting the existing car? What does the rollout look like?
Yeah. So first of all, what we do is we do not like build new cars, because we like think about scaling. And for us, I also checked like robotaxis, how many robotaxis are going to be there on the roads in like a couple of years? And I think like the global robotaxi production capacity currently is projected to 300,000 new cars for 2030, which and the global car manufacturing capacity is 90 million. So we said, okay, we do not want to be constrained by this, so we have to find a way how we can unlock, like our own growth. And so we said there is currently 1.4 billion cars in the world. About a third of them is software defined, which means we can basically tap into this with the chip that I showed earlier. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just buy new cars that run off the manufacturing line today, which are software defined, but are not autonomous, and we're going to then outfit them with our technology, and then we're going to lease them. And then the operational model is you have an app, you can just basically summon the car, it shows up wherever you are. We take care of making sure the car is charged, clean, maybe has some refreshments in for you, and then the car is going to wait nearby. It's going to find its own like waiting spot, and then anytime you need it, you basically can just summon it. And then you can also like in the car we make sure that the user experience is as easy as possible, so you don't have to like spend too much time on screen. So you can also just talk to the car, tell it where you want to go, and then it's going to pick up. We try to make it like extremely intuitive.
And to make this all more concrete for everyone, I know you have 2 cars here. What's the best way to get a demo today? Yeah,
so there's 2 of my crew here in the back. I don't see anything with the lights, but maybe they can wave. They have iPads. They collect demo slots in a Calendly, I think. And so feel free to see us, to try it out, take photos, videos, post about it, the good and bad. We'd love to hear your feedback. Yeah.
If you haven't had a chance to ride in an autonomous vehicle before, I mean, this is a super, super cool opportunity. They have 2 of their cars outside, and I will say my first time, for me, it was in a Tesla, and like it's a game-changing experience. So I would highly encourage all of you to find the Bliq team and get signed up for a demo ride. I'm sure they're going to go quickly. Julian, last question. Everything goes right for Bliq in 5 years. Where is the world in 5 years? But let's focus on transportation, and how does Bliq fit into that future?
Yeah. So we we upgrade loads of different categories of cars, not just consumer. And I see at a capacity anywhere between 100 to 200,000 cars per year. Because I think that's possible because we basically circumvent the scaling constraints and all of that in Europe. And so we just want to unlock now country by country. Estonia first, and then we see what comes next.
Super. Well, Julian, thank you for being here. Thank you to the folks at TechChill for having us. And I hope all of you can experience this amazing technology.
Thank you.